I've been married to Karen for over 20 years, but lately, things felt off. The small things that used to make me feel secure now left a lingering sense of unease. Our conversations were filled with awkward silences. Karen was always on her phone, texting someone or scrolling, and whenever I entered the room, she would lock her screen or flip the phone over. I knew something wasn't right, but I couldn't figure out what it was. One evening, as we sat down to dinner, she casually mentioned that she would be meeting up with a friend after work the next day. Normally, I wouldn't think twice about it. Karen had her own social life. She would grab drinks with friends or go to a yoga class. But something about this felt different. She avoided looking at me when she said it, and her voice was off. Too casual, too smooth, almost rehearsed. "Who's the friend?" I asked, trying to keep my tone neutral. Karen hesitated, barely noticeable, but enough to make my suspicion flicker. "Oh, just Sarah," she said, forcing a smile. "We're going to catch up. Girl stuff, you know." I nodded, pretending not to notice the uneasiness creeping into my chest. Sarah was one of her co-workers, someone she occasionally mentioned in passing, but they'd never been close. Why now? Why this sudden urge to meet up? The next evening, I watched her get dressed to go out. She was taking extra time with her appearance, fixing her hair, reapplying makeup, choosing an outfit that was more suited for a date than a casual meetup with a friend. She sprayed on a bit of perfume, the kind she used to wear when we went out on anniversaries. The knot in my stomach tightened. "You're really going all out for a girls' night, huh?" I said, trying to sound playful, though my words felt more like an accusation. Karen laughed, but it was hollow. "Oh, come on. It's just fun to dress up sometimes." She kissed me on the cheek, her lips cold and distant. "I won't be late." As she walked out the door, I stood there, staring after her, the weight of my unease pressing down on me. I tried to shake it off. Maybe I was being paranoid. Maybe it was nothing. But something in my gut told me otherwise. That night, she didn't come home until well after midnight. I had pretended to fall asleep on the couch, but the sound of the door creaking open jolted me awake. I listened as she quietly moved through the house, slipping into the bedroom, careful not to wake me. The air was thick with suspicion. She didn't smell like she had been out with Sarah. She smelled like someone who had been in someone else's arms. The next morning, I couldn't let it go. The suspicion had burrowed into my mind, festering. As Karen got ready for work, I casually asked, "So, how was your night with Sarah? You were out pretty late." She paused for just a split second, her back to me. "It was fine," she replied, her voice a little too smooth. "We talked, had a couple of drinks. Nothing exciting." She turned to me with a tight smile, her eyes betraying a flicker of nervousness. I could feel my suspicion rising, the doubt growing by the second. But I didn't push. Not yet. Instead, I decided to follow her the next time she went out. I needed to know what was really going on. This wasn't just about my wife meeting an old friend. Something deeper was happening, something she was hiding from me. A week later, the opportunity came. Karen told me she was meeting up with Sarah again. "Just another girls' night," she said, her voice light and carefree. But I wasn't fooled. As soon as she left the house, I grabbed my keys and followed her. She didn't head toward Sarah's house or any familiar hangout spots. Instead, she drove to a quiet, out-of-the-way restaurant on the edge of town. I parked a few spots away, watching as she walked inside. My heart was pounding, my palms slick with sweat. What was I doing? Was I really about to find out the truth, or was this just some wild goose chase? I sat in the car, waiting. Minutes passed, and then I saw her. Karen wasn't alone. As my sister, Rachel, 10 years younger than me, walked into the restaurant and joined her at the table. Rachel, with her confident stride and infectious energy, had always been ambitious. She had a way of drawing people to her, of getting what she wanted. But what was she doing here, meeting my wife in secret? I strained to see through the restaurant window. The two of them sat close, laughing and talking like old friends. But there was something off about it, something more intimate than just casual conversation. Rachel reached across the table and touched Karen's hand. It was a small gesture, but it sent a chill through me. My mind raced with possibilities, but the truth was too unthinkable to accept. I took a deep breath, trying to calm the whirlwind of emotions inside me. I snapped a few pictures with my phone, my hands shaking as I captured the scene unfolding in front of me. This was more than just a coincidence. I didn't know what it was yet, but I knew that Karen wasn't telling me the whole story. I left before they could see me, driving aimlessly through the night, my thoughts spiraling. How could Karen do this to me? And with Rachel, of all people? The betrayal cut deeper than anything I had ever imagined. By the time I got home, Karen was already in bed, pretending everything was normal. But nothing was normal anymore. Something had broken between us, and no matter how much I tried to ignore it, I couldn't shake the feeling that my life had just taken a turn I wasn't prepared for. I needed answers, and soon, because the person I trusted most in the world had just become a stranger. The next few days felt like I was living in a fog. Every interaction with Karen was tainted by what I had seen that night, her and Rachel sitting together, laughing, touching. I couldn't shake the image of it, and it replayed in my mind like a broken record. Was I just being paranoid? Was it possible that my wife and sister had formed some secret friendship without me knowing? No, there was more to it than that. I could feel it in my bones. But I needed proof. My suspicions weren't enough. I couldn't confront Karen based on a feeling. I had to be sure. I had to know the truth, no matter how ugly it might be. I started small, subtle, like a detective in my own home. Karen's phone was always nearby, but she guarded it fiercely. She was careful, more careful than I had ever noticed before. Her passwords, her lock screens, everything was airtight. She had gotten good at hiding things, which only fueled my determination to uncover whatever it was she didn't want me to see. One evening, when she went for a shower, I saw my chance. Her phone was on the bedside table, unlocked for once. My hands were shaking as I picked it up, quickly scrolling through her recent messages. But there was nothing out of the ordinary, just the usual chats with friends, work emails, and reminders. I felt the knot in my stomach tighten. Was I losing it? Then I noticed something strange. There were no messages from Rachel. Not a single one. No calls, no texts, no emails. If they were meeting up, how were they communicating? It didn't add up. That's when I remembered the second phone I had seen Karen texting on in the bathroom. She had a secret phone, one she kept hidden from me, and that was where the real story lay. But for now, it was out of reach, and I had no idea how to find it. The next morning, I decided to follow her again. She told me she had a meeting after work, another vague excuse, but I knew it was more than that. I had to be careful not to tip her off, so I waited until she left, giving her enough time before I slipped out of the house and followed her once again. She didn't go to the office like she had said. Instead, she drove toward a more secluded part of town. My heart was pounding as I trailed behind, careful not to get too close. It felt wrong, spying on my own wife, but the gnawing in my gut wouldn't let me stop. I had to know. Karen parked outside a boutique hotel, the kind of place you'd go to if you didn't want to be seen. I watched from my car as she got out and walked toward the entrance, her eyes darting around as if checking for anyone who might recognize her. That confirmed it. Whatever was going on, she didn't want anyone to know. She entered the lobby, and I stayed outside, my heart racing in my chest. I waited, staring at the door, waiting for someone to join her. 10 minutes passed, and then, just as I feared, Rachel appeared. My sister. She walked into the hotel as if she owned the place, her head held high, her confident stride the same as always. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly I thought it might crack. Rachel was younger, more ambitious, and more daring than anyone I knew. She had always gotten what she wanted, no matter who stood in her way. But I never thought she would want this. I never thought she would want Karen. I sat there, frozen, as the minutes ticked by. Should I storm in and confront them? Should I make a scene? My mind was spinning with anger, hurt, and confusion. But instead, I waited. I waited because I needed more than just a confrontation. I needed to know the full truth before I acted. An hour later, they emerged. Karen and Rachel, walking out of the hotel, laughing as if they had just had a light lunch. There was no shame, no guilt on their faces, only the casual ease of two people who had shared something that no one else was supposed to know. I watched as they said their goodbyes, Rachel heading to her car and Karen driving home. I sat in my car for a long time after they left, trying to process everything I had just witnessed. There was no doubt now. It wasn't just my imagination. Karen was involved with Rachel, my own sister, and they were hiding it from me. The betrayal cut deeper than I had ever thought possible. It wasn't just Karen's infidelity, it was the fact that my sister, someone I had trusted all my life, was part of it. They had both deceived me, both made me into a fool, and now I was left sitting in the aftermath of their lies. When I got home, Karen was already in bed, pretending as if nothing had happened. I stood at the doorway, watching her sleep, wondering how long she had been lying to me. How long had this been going on behind my back? My mind was racing with questions, but there were no answers. I couldn't confront her. Not yet. I needed more. I needed to know the full extent of their betrayal before I could even begin to think about what to do next. So I waited. I waited for the right moment, for the right evidence that would blow their lies wide open. The next day, I contacted a private investigator. If I was going to find out the truth, I needed help. I couldn't do this on my own anymore. The investigator assured me he would dig up everything, find out where they met, what they talked about, and who else might be involved. I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answers, but I couldn't stop myself now. I had already gone too far. The trail had begun, and there was no turning back. Once I hired the private investigator, everything moved quickly. The moment I handed the reins over to him, I felt a sense of both relief and dread. Relief because I didn't have to carry the burden of figuring it all out on my own, and dread because deep down, I already knew what the outcome would be. The betrayal was real. I had seen it with my own eyes, but I still needed hard proof, something I couldn't ignore, something Karen couldn't deny. The investigator was thorough. He didn't waste any time. He set up surveillance on Karen and Rachel, tracking their movements and monitoring their communications. While I went through the motions of daily life work, errands, pretending everything was fine at home, he was out there, gathering the evidence I needed. One evening, while Karen was out again, supposedly working late, I received a call from the investigator. I stepped outside to take it, not wanting Karen to overhear anything if she came home early. "We've got something," he said, his voice low and serious. "Your wife met with Rachel again this afternoon, this time at a park outside the city." My stomach twisted, and there was no mistaking the nature of their relationship. It's not just a casual meetup. They're involved in a way that's intimate. The anger surged through me, but I forced myself to stay calm. "Do you have photos? Something I can use?" "I've got everything you need," he replied. "Pictures, phone records, text messages. They've been very careful, but not careful enough. I'll email you the files tonight." I thanked him, though it felt hollow. This was what I had wanted proof. But the reality of it was hitting me harder than I anticipated. I wasn't just about to confront Karen with some vague suspicion. I had real, undeniable evidence that she was betraying me with my own sister. That night, I sat at my desk, staring at my laptop screen as the files downloaded. My heart pounded in my chest, a mix of dread and anticipation. I clicked open the first set of photos, and there they were, Karen and Rachel, sitting close together at the park, laughing, holding hands. The intimacy between them was undeniable. In one photo, Rachel leaned in and kissed Karen on the cheek, and the look on Karen's face, one of happiness, of comfort, was enough to confirm what I had feared all along. I scrolled through the text messages the investigator had retrieved. They were short, coded, but the meaning was clear. They had been meeting up for months, keeping it a secret, hiding it from me. The texts were filled with plans to see each other, messages about how much they missed one another. It was a relationship that went far deeper than I could have ever imagined. I sat back in my chair, feeling numb. How had it come to this? How had I missed the signs for so long? Karen and I had been married for 20 years. We had built a life together, shared everything. Or at least I thought we had. And Rachel, my own sister, she had always been headstrong, always lived life on her terms. But this was a betrayal on a level I couldn't even comprehend. The anger simmered beneath the surface, threatening to explode. But I kept it in check. I couldn't just fly off the handle. If I was going to confront Karen, it needed to be calculated. I needed to corner her with the evidence, give her no room to wiggle out of it. She had to face the truth, no matter how much she tried to deny it. The next few days were torture. I tried to act normal, going to work, coming home, eating dinner with Karen like nothing had changed. But everything had changed. Every time she smiled at me, every time she asked how my day was, I could barely stand to look at her. The weight of her lies hung between us like a dark cloud, and the urge to confront her was becoming unbearable. But I waited. I had to wait for the right moment. The investigator kept me updated. He followed Karen and Rachel closely, documenting their secret meetings, watching as they played out their affair right under my nose. It became clear that they weren't just sneaking around out of lust. This was something more, something that had been building for a long time. It wasn't just a fling. It was a full-blown affair, a relationship that had its own life, its own momentum. One evening, after Karen had gone to bed, I retrieved the flash drives from the private investigator. I plugged one into my laptop, scrolling through the footage he had gathered. There they were again, Karen and Rachel, this time in a hotel room, sitting close, talking in low voices. I could feel the bile rise in my throat as I watched them, their closeness, their betrayal. This was it. I had all the evidence I needed. There was no more denying it, no more hiding from the truth. Karen had been unfaithful to me, not just with anyone, but with my sister. The two people I should have been able to trust the most had destroyed everything. I closed my laptop and sat in the dark, the weight of the betrayal pressing down on me. I knew I had to confront her. There was no turning back now. The surveillance had given me all the answers I needed, but those answers had come at a cost. The next morning, I woke up feeling like a different man. The sadness was still there, but it was overshadowed by something stronger, a cold, simmering rage. I wasn't just going to confront Karen. I was going to make her face every lie, every deceitful moment, and I was going to make her understand exactly what she had done. The game was over. Now it was time for the truth. The next morning, I woke up with a decision I couldn't delay any longer. The evidence sat heavy in my mind. Every moment of betrayal seared into my memory. The photographs, the texts, the surveillance footage. I had seen enough. Karen had been unfaithful, and not just with anyone but with my sister. It was time for the lies to end. I spent the day quietly, my anger simmering just beneath the surface. Karen, as usual, acted like everything was normal. She made breakfast, asked about my day, smiled that same smile I had once found so comforting. But now, all I saw was deceit behind it. The weight of her betrayal crushed every bit of trust that had taken 2 decades to build. By the time dinner rolled around, I had made up my mind. It was time. The confrontation wasn't something I could plan, for there was no script, no perfect words that could undo the damage. But I needed her to know that I wasn't blind anymore. We sat at the dinner table, the silence stretching between us. I barely touched my food, my mind replaying the images of her with Rachel in that hotel room. The messages they exchanged, "Don't worry, Tom will never find out." The irony hit hard. I had found out. I knew everything now. Karen noticed my quietness, glancing at me with slight concern. "You okay?" she asked, her voice casual. But there was a hint of something else beneath it, unease, maybe even guilt. I set my fork down, the clatter breaking the thick silence. "We need to talk, Karen." Her face froze for a second, but she recovered quickly, offering me a small smile. "Sure. About what?" I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms. "You know exactly what I'm talking about." She hesitated, her fork hovering over her plate before she set it down. I don't understand. What do you mean?" I took a deep breath, the anger I had been suppressing starting to boil over. "Stop lying to me, Karen. I know about you and Rachel." Her eyes widened, a flicker of panic flashing across her face. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Her hands fidgeted in her lap, and I saw the cracks forming in her calm exterior. The mask was slipping. "What are you talking about?" she finally managed to say, her voice trembling just a bit. But it wasn't confusion. It was fear. She knew. She knew she had been caught. "I followed you," I said, my voice cold and steady. "I've seen you with her. I know about the hotel, the meetings, the texts, everything." Karen's face drained of color, her mouth opening and closing as if she was struggling to find the right words. "Tom, it's not what you think. Don't lie to me." I snapped, the rage I had been holding back finally spilling over. I slammed my hand on the table, making her flinch. Don't insult me by trying to twist this. I know what's been going on. You've been seeing Rachel behind my back for months. How could you? How could you do this to me? She stared at me, her eyes filling with tears. I didn't mean for it to happen, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I didn't plan this. It just happened. Just happened? I echoed, my voice thick with disbelief. You don't just happen to betray your husband with his own sister. You made choices, Karen. You chose to lie, to sneak around, to destroy our marriage. How long has this been going on? She wiped at her eyes, her breath coming in shaky gasps. I don't know. A few months. A few months? I felt like I had been punched in the gut. And you thought I wouldn't find out? You thought you could just keep this secret forever? Karen shook her head, tears streaming down her face now. I was going to stop. I swear, Tom, I was going to end it. I didn't want to hurt you. Too late for that, I said bitterly. You've already hurt me. More than you can imagine. I stood up from the table, pacing the room, trying to control the rage bubbling inside me. Karen sat there, sobbing quietly, her face buried in her hands. Part of me wanted to scream at her, to unleash all the anger and pain I had been holding inside. But another part of me just felt hollow. How could you do this, Karen? I asked, my voice softer now. After everything we've been through, after 20 years together, how could you betray me like this? With Rachel, of all people? She looked up at me, her eyes red and puffy from crying. I don't know, she whispered. I don't know how it happened. It wasn't supposed to be like this. I never wanted to hurt you. But you did, I said, my voice breaking. You did hurt me. You've destroyed everything. Our marriage, our family, all of it gone. And for what? What could Rachel give you that I couldn't? Karen shook her head, unable to answer. The silence between us was deafening. I walked over to the kitchen counter and pulled out the folder I had prepared. Inside were the photos, the text messages, all the evidence the investigator had gathered. I slammed it down on the table in front of her. Here, I said, my voice cold. In case you think you can still lie your way out of this. Karen stared at the folder, her hands trembling as she reached for it. She flipped through the photos, her face crumpling with each one. The weight of her betrayal was written all over her expression, and for the first time, I saw her truly broken. I never wanted this, she sobbed, covering her face with her hands again. I'm so sorry, Tom. I've ruined everything. Yes, I said quietly. You have. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The only sound was Karen's quiet sobbing, the weight of what had happened hanging heavily in the air between us. I felt numb, like all the anger had drained out of me, leaving behind only exhaustion. I don't know if I can forgive you, I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. I don't know if I can ever trust you again. Karen looked up at me, her eyes filled with desperation. Please, Tom, please, don't leave me. I know I don't deserve it, but I love you. I'll do anything to make this right. Please. I stared at her, torn between the love we had shared for 2 decades and the betrayal that had shattered everything. The woman I had trusted, the woman I had built a life with, was sitting in front of me, begging for forgiveness. But could I give it? Could I ever look at her the same way again? I don't know what happens next, I said, shaking my head. But right now, I can't even look at you. I turned and walked out of the kitchen, leaving Karen behind, her sobs echoing through the house. And in that moment, I wasn't sure if I had lost her, or if I had lost myself. The days after the confrontation passed in a blur. I couldn't bring myself to talk to Karen. I could barely stand to be in the same room as her. She was constantly apologizing, begging me for another chance. But her words felt hollow. She had betrayed me, shattered our marriage, and no amount of "I'm sorry" was going to change that. I slept in the guest room, leaving Karen to the cold emptiness of our bedroom. The distance between us wasn't just physical, it was emotional, and it was growing wider with each passing day. I felt trapped, drowning in a sea of anger, sadness, and betrayal, and every time I thought about her and Rachel, it only deepened the pain. But amidst the pain, A new emotion began to surface: revenge. Why should Karen get away with what she had done? Why should she continue living her life while I suffered? While my heart shattered a little more each day? She had taken something from me, something I could never get back. It was time to take something from her. I wasn't going to sit around, being the broken husband she'd left in her wake. I needed to even the score. That's when I met Lily. It was late one evening, just a few weeks after the confrontation. Lily was younger than Karen, with long, flowing hair and a confidence that drew every eye in the room. She sat at the bar, just a few seats away from me, and when our eyes met, I could tell she wasn't there by accident. We started talking, her laughter cutting through the haze of my thoughts, distracting me from the darkness that had been looming over me for weeks. She was beautiful, more beautiful than Karen had ever been. Her smile was easy, her words flirtatious. She knew how to get under my skin, and I let her. By the end of the night, I wasn't thinking about Karen anymore. I wasn't thinking about Rachel or the wreckage of my life. All I could think about was Lily, the way she made me feel alive again, like I had something to prove, something to reclaim. It didn't take long before we ended up back at her apartment. I knew what I was doing. I knew why I was there. I wanted to hurt Karen the way she had hurt me, to strip away whatever power she thought she still held over me. And in that moment, with Lily in my arms, I felt a twisted sense of victory. The next morning, as I drove home, the weight of what I had done hit me, but not in the way I expected. I didn't feel guilt. I didn't feel regret. I felt satisfied. I had taken something back for myself. Karen had broken us, and I had retaliated in kind. We were even now, or so I thought. When I got home, Karen was waiting for me. She looked like she hadn't slept all night, her eyes swollen from crying. I hadn't told her where I was going the night before, and I could see the panic on her face. She knew something had changed. "Where were you?" she asked, her voice small, fragile. I shrugged. Out. Out where? You didn't come home last night." I stared at her, feeling a strange sense of calm wash over me. "It doesn't matter where I was." She took a shaky breath, her hands trembling at her sides. "Tom, what's happening to us? Please, talk to me. I know I've hurt you, but we can fix this. We can get through this." I almost laughed at the absurdity of her words. Fix this? There was no fixing what she had done. There was no going back to the way things were. But instead of saying that, I just shook my head. "It's too late, Karen," I said, my voice flat. "There's nothing left to fix." She started to cry again, but I didn't care. The woman I had loved for 20 years was gone, replaced by someone I didn't recognize. She had destroyed everything, and now I was done trying to pick up the pieces. "I don't think I can forgive you," I said, my tone colder than I had intended. "And I'm not even sure I want to try." Her sobs grew louder, but I didn't comfort her. I didn't feel any sympathy. She had brought this on herself, and I wasn't going to be her emotional crutch anymore. For the next few days, I kept my distance, spending more and more time out of the house, avoiding her at every opportunity. I met up with Lily a few more times, each encounter reinforcing my decision to move on from Karen. There was no future for us anymore. The trust, the love, it had all been burned to the ground, and I wasn't interested in rebuilding it. Eventually, Karen stopped begging for my forgiveness. She knew it was over, even if neither of us had said it out loud. The distance between us had become an unbridgeable chasm, and there was no turning back. One evening, as we sat in the living room in silence, I finally said what had been hanging in the air for weeks. "I think we need to separate." Karen didn't argue. She didn't cry. She just nodded, her face pale and defeated. "I'll move out," she whispered, her voice barely audible. And just like that, it was over. 20 years of marriage, 20 years of memories, shattered by betrayal and revenge. I had gotten my resolution, but it hadn't brought the satisfaction I had hoped for. As Karen packed her things and left, I stood at the window, watching her go. The house felt emptier than ever. I had sought revenge, and in the process, I had lost everything. But perhaps that's what we both deserved. The day Karen left, I expected to feel relief. I thought that once she was gone, once the house was free of the memories and the weight of her betrayal, I would finally be able to breathe again. But instead, the silence was suffocating. The empty rooms, the vacant spaces that once held laughter, arguments, and life, now they were just hollow. I stood by the window long after Karen had driven away, her car disappearing down the street like a chapter of my life closing for good. But instead of feeling victorious, I felt lost. The revenge that had fueled me, the anger that had kept me going, it had all burned out, leaving me with nothing but an overwhelming emptiness. In the days that followed, the fallout of what I had done settled in. My marriage was over, destroyed by betrayal on both sides. Karen had hurt me first, yes, but my own actions hadn't made things better. They hadn't healed the wound or made me feel whole again. Cheating on her with Lily had been an act of desperation, a way to reclaim some sense of power, but it had left me feeling hollow in the end. Lily was gone too. I hadn't even tried to continue whatever it was we had. It was never real. It had been a temporary distraction, a way to feel something other than pain. But once the fog cleared, once the high of revenge wore off, I knew there was no future with her. I hadn't even said goodbye. I just stopped calling, and that was that. The divorce papers came a week after Karen left. I stared at the envelope for hours before I could bring myself to open it. Inside were all the formalities: the division of assets, the custody arrangements for the rare times we'd see the kids when they weren't at college, and the final dissolution of what we had once built together. It was all so clinical, so detached. 20 years of marriage, reduced to a few pages of legal jargon. I signed the papers without a second thought. There was no point in dragging it out. What was left to save? Nothing. Not the love we once had, not the trust, not even the companionship that had seen us through the toughest moments of our lives. Everything was gone. In the following weeks, I tried to return to some sense of normalcy. I went back to work, throwing myself into the routine of it all. But the truth was, I wasn't the same person anymore. I walked through my days in a daze, disconnected from the world around me. My coworkers noticed the change, but they didn't say anything. They knew better. People always do when you're wearing the kind of invisible scars I carried. The house, once full of life, now felt more like a museum of what had been. I found myself wandering through it at night, remembering the moments that used to make it a home: Karen and I cooking together in the kitchen, the sound of our kids playing in the living room, the late nights spent watching TV in bed, just the two of us. Now it was just me. The silence weighed on me like a lead blanket, a constant reminder of everything I had lost. The revenge I had taken on Karen had done nothing to heal me. If anything, it had only deepened the wound. I had wanted her to feel the same pain I felt, but in the end, all I had done was make sure we both ended up broken. Rachel had tried to reach out a few times, but I ignored her calls. What was there to say? My own sister had played a part in the destruction of my marriage. I didn't know if I could ever forgive her for that. The thought of seeing her, hearing her voice, it just made the betrayal feel fresh all over again. So, I stayed away. I stayed away from everyone. Eventually, people stopped asking how I was. They moved on with their lives, as they should have. I couldn't blame them. I had isolated myself in this bubble of bitterness and regret, and I didn't know how to break free from it. One night, as I sat in the dark living room, staring at nothing in particular, I realized that the revenge I had sought, the destruction I had caused in the name of justice, hadn't fixed anything. It hadn't brought back the man I used to be. It hadn't undone the betrayal or restored the love I had lost. In truth, it had only left me alone, angry, and tired. And as the weight of it all pressed down on me, I realized something I hadn't been willing to admit before. Revenge had cost me everything, but it hadn't given me anything in return. The fallout wasn't just the end of my marriage, it was the end of who I thought I was. Weeks turned into months, and life carried on around me, though it felt like I was standing still. The house was quiet, suffocatingly so, and every creak of the floorboards echoed through the empty rooms. I couldn't bring myself to change anything, to move things around, or to clear out the remnants of Karen's life that still lingered. Her books were still on the shelves, her favorite mug sat untouched on the counter. It felt as if erasing her would be admitting it was really over. But it was over. I knew that. The divorce had gone through, and Karen was gone. I hadn't seen her since the day she packed up her things and walked out the door. The finality of it all still weighed on me, like a ghost that wouldn't leave. Every time I thought I had come to terms with it, The memories would resurface, small things that reminded me of the life we used to share. Rachel, too, had faded into the background. She'd sent a few more messages, tried calling, but I couldn't face her. She was as much a part of this betrayal as Karen had been, and forgiving her seemed impossible. How could I let go of something so deeply rooted, something that had broken me in ways I never thought possible? Every time I thought of Rachel, it wasn't just anger I felt, it was disappointment. She had been my little sister, someone I had protected, someone I had trusted, and now she was a stranger. But I couldn't stay in this place forever. I knew that much. The bitterness, the isolation, the anger, it was eating away at me, turning me into someone I barely recognized. My coworkers had stopped asking how I was, stopped inviting me out for drinks after work. I didn't blame them. I had withdrawn into my own misery, shutting everyone out, and I wasn't sure how to find my way back. It was one afternoon, sitting at my desk at work, that I realized something had to change. I was staring blankly at my computer screen, not really seeing the words in front of me, when it hit me this was my life now. Not the past, not the betrayal, not the marriage that had crumbled beneath the weight of lies. This moment, right now, was all I had, and I had a choice to make. I could either let the past continue to define me, or I could move forward, as difficult as that seemed. That night, I went home and stood in the doorway of the guest room, the one I had been sleeping in since Karen left. The bed was unmade. Clothes were strewn across the floor, and the blinds were half drawn, casting long shadows across the room. It looked like a place where someone had given up, and maybe that was true. I had given up for a while, at least. But standing there, I realized I didn't want to live like this anymore. I didn't want to be stuck in the aftermath of what had happened. I wanted to start again. The first thing I did was clear out the guest room. It took hours, but I folded the clothes, made the bed, and opened the blinds, letting light pour in. It felt like the first real step towards something new. A small step, but a step nonetheless. Over the next few days, I slowly began to declutter the house. I packed up Karen's things not out of anger, but because I needed to reclaim the space as my own. Each item I put away felt like a weight being lifted from my shoulders. I wasn't erasing her memory, but I was making room for something different. For me, for whatever came next. Then there was Rachel. Her betrayal lingered, unresolved. I hadn't spoken to her since everything came crashing down. Part of me wanted to keep it that way, to leave the wound open as a reminder of how deeply she had hurt me. But another part of me, the part that was tired of carrying so much anger, knew I needed closure. I needed to face her, not for her sake, but for mine. I wasn't sure how it would go, but one evening, I found myself picking up the phone and calling her. It rang twice before she answered, her voice cautious, almost hesitant. "Tom?" "Yeah," I said, my voice tight. "We need to talk." We agreed to meet the next day at a coffee shop. I arrived first, feeling the tension coil in my stomach. When Rachel walked in, she looked nervous, her eyes searching mine for some sign of forgiveness. She sat down across from me, her hands fidgeting with the cup in front of her. For a long time, neither of us spoke. "I'm sorry," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know that doesn't fix anything, but I am. I never meant to hurt you." I stared at her, unsure of how to respond. Part of me wanted to lash out, to remind her of everything she had done, but another part of me, the part that was trying to move forward, realized that holding on to the anger wasn't helping anyone, not her, not me. "I don't know if I can ever forgive you," I said, my voice steady, "but I don't want to keep hating you either. This whole thing, it's destroyed too much already." Rachel's eyes filled with tears, but she nodded. "I understand." We talked for a while, about everything that had happened, about the choices she had made and the impact they had. It wasn't easy, but it felt necessary. By the time we left the cafe, I didn't feel like everything was fixed, but I did feel lighter, like I had finally let go of something I had been carrying for too long. In the weeks that followed, I focused on rebuilding my life. It wasn't easy, and there were days when the weight of everything still pressed down on me, but slowly, I started to feel like myself again. I took up new hobbies, reconnected with old friends, and even went out on a few dates. It wasn't about replacing what I had lost, it was about moving forward, about realizing that life didn't end with the betrayal. There was still more out there for me. And for the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful about the future. I had been broken, yes, but now I was learning how to put the pieces back together. And in that, I found my strength.